This is easily one of the most frequently asked questions that I get. Brewmaster monks can wield a plethora of different weapons, allowing for a versatile arsenal, but knowing which ones to choose can be quite the dilemma. In this video, I'm hoping to provide insight into why you might choose to dual wield versus wielding a polearm. For context, this video is being published at the end of the first season of The War Within, but what I'm going to talk about in this video will hopefully remain true when approaching future patches. We'll see how well that ages. While the default answer for many Brewmaster players will just be sim your character, I do want to attempt to explain why sims may state one over the other and provide reasons why the class sometimes changes what it prefers. With that out of the way, let's dive in. So I want to start off with dual wielding, and it's because it has many perks to it. For starters, wielding two items gives the Brewmaster more agency and control over their secondary stats. Brewmaster players who want to avoid hitting diminishing returns on their stats may opt to play two different weapons, granting them different types of secondary stats. Generally, these types of diminishing returns are rare, but do occur. In the current state of the game, Critical Strike does hit its first diminishing return at 30%. Therefore, you may have two different weapons that possess Critical Strike. So if you happen to be at 31% and you had an extra weapon laying around, you could shift your stats very slightly to be more appropriate by just changing your weapons. This shift in secondary stats, again, is extremely minor and will often not make or break the reasons why you may die in a dungeon, but it does provide more flexibility and agency. Wielding two weapons also allows the user to possess two weapon enchants. Depending on the season, these enchants can be a substantial source of damage or main stat, which can lead to more single target damage or survivability on a case-to-case basis. These enchants can proc independently as well, leading to higher uptime or just more procs in general. This type of weapon setup also offers faster attack speed, which has some interesting interactions with talents like Press the Advantage, though as of the introduction of hero talents, this talent choice is more or less dead in the water. If Press the Advantage ever becomes stronger as an alternative option, generally you'll see higher uptime by dual wielding. Lastly, while your auto attack's direct damage will be smaller than wielding two-handed weapons, the increased attack speed makes up for the smaller damage hits with quicker attacks. So basically all of the benefits I just listed will go away when you opt to use a single weapon wield. Your attacks are going to be slower, you have less flexibility over your secondary stats, and you sacrifice your second enchant, but at what cost? Wielding a polearm or stave does have some merit to it. While your attacks may be slower, each hit will be substantially more impactful than the dual wielding counterpart. This can be the extra hit you need to maintain threat on a mob. Another really important aspect to this though is when you are dual wielding, your attacks have a chance to be parried. This is often in the range of 10 to 20%. When wielding a polearm, you remove the risk of your attacks being parried by the target. This removes the risk of your attacks occasionally missing, which creates more consistent damage. This is the primary component why single weapon wielding tends to be a little stronger without good cantrip effects. Speaking of cantrip effects, once we introduce these, this is where things get a little tricky. Weapons with effects can really be a hit or miss. This tier we have weapons like Void Reaper's Warped Blade, but we also have Harvester's Interdiction. Void Reaper's Warped Blade, for example, can contribute almost 1% extra damage without really costing you anything. This damage can further be bolstered if you can get your hands on the Void Reaper's contract. The issue with this setup though is that Void Reaper's contract is specific to DPS specializations, which can make it difficult to obtain unless you're raiding with a coordinated guild group or you're just blessed by the RNG gods. Harvester's Interdiction, on the other hand, can be farmed from dungeons at a heroic item level, but obtaining it from your weekly vault on the mythic track can be even more difficult. Despite the level of the weapon though, the Cantrip effect is a very minor damage increase, a measly 0.1% contribution on average. More often than not, we want to see these effects granting at least a 3% damage bonus to really hold their own. Both the Warped Blade and Harvester's Interdiction don't even come close to this, so they don't really play a major role in dictating what we use. Now, these aren't necessarily bad items to wield. It's not uncommon though for cantrip effects to have a negative counterpart. Befouler's Syringe is a prime example of this. This item just doesn't have main stat on it, making it extremely hard to justify wielding, despite the effect. For those who played back in Dragonflight, you probably remember weapons like Rashan the Immortal Blaze. It dealt damage to your target, but it also dealt damage to you. Similarly, Thorncaller's Claw possessed only half the secondary stats of an equal item level weapon. these often will play some role in determining what you're going to want to wield. Going into next season, Brewmaster monks are going to have access to Capo's Molten Knuckles. Now, at a glance, we can see that these don't necessarily grant secondary stats, but they will deal some nasty damage. Through my testing at least, I'm seeing upwards of 4% overall, which can justify wielding it. With such a powerful effect being available, there is a chance that next season, when looking for pure damage output, dual wielding may be the play, because the amount of damage we can deal outweighs the loss of secondary stats, and the chance of having your attacks parried. Now, the last very little thing I do want to mention, there is something that not a lot of players know about, but while you are in Mythic Plus, while you can't change your gear, you can still change your weapons between pulls. Now, really min-maxing players may set up macros that allow them to swap their weapons in certain seasons where there are a mixture of different powerful weapon types. This isn't something I'd personally recommend to just any player because remembering to swap weapons between pulls is difficult enough, but it just adds a layer of complexity that isn't needed or will keep you alive. So with all of this in mind, we can now talk about the best setup. Obviously, this is going to change from season to season, but I do hope that this video has given you more context on why the meta of dual wielding versus polearm wielding is a constant discussion. You have things like Cantrip Effects. Attacks can be parried when you're wielding 2 weapons instead of 1. Talent options do come into play if Press the Advantage ever becomes more powerful than it currently is. In the current season, the sims are showing that Polearms and Staves are dealing significantly more damage. The Cantrip Effects are fairly weak, and when you are dual wielding, your attacks are being parried, and the effect of the weapon isn't making up for the loss of 2 enchants and the parried attacks. So overall, Cantrip Effects are really subpar this season. Going into next season though, at least with the current power level of some of these one-handed effects, there is a chance we are going to return to dual wielding, but only time will tell. I believe I covered everything in this video. Per usual, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. Also, if you're new here, feel free to subscribe. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Lastly, a massive shout out to all my lovely Patreon supporters, because without you guys, I wouldn't be able to make content like this. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.